I stared out the frosted window, watching the last touch of sunset glisten across the towering 20-foot snow sculpture glaring directly into Karen's window. She hadn't opened her blinds in 3 days, not since. For months, the HOA had fined me for my unauthorized snow sculptures, artistic expressions that I proudly crafted every winter. To them, my whimsical displays disrupted the pristine uniformity of our neighborhood. But to me, those sculptures were the embodiment of creative freedom on our icy canvas. And none of the fines, no matter how steep, could silence my passion for art. That evening, as the twilight deepened, I beheld my latest creation, a colossal, glistening statue of Karen herself, carved entirely from snow. It stood 20 foot tall and smirked down at her house like a frosty monument to irony. Every detail, from her notorious scowl to the meticulous contours of her glasses and furrowed brow, was captured in the delicate interplay of light and shadow on the ice. In that moment, as the chill air whispered promises of winter's bite, I knew that Karen's rigid enforcement had finally met its match. Tonight, I was sending a message loud and clear. When you try to muzzle creativity with your arbitrary fines, the backlash can be as breathtaking and as uncompromising as a masterpiece in the snow. I could already imagine the shock on her face when she finally dared to peek out. The sight of a giant, frozen Karen glaring back at her would be a fitting rebuttal to every petty complaint and every unjust fine. This wasn't just art. It was a rebellion sculpted in ice, a testament to the idea that beauty and freedom cannot be contained by a board of bureaucrats. And as the last rays of sunset faded, the snow sculpture stood defiant, a silent promise that this winter I was in charge. Crescent Ridge, our upscale gated community, was a picture-perfect suburb where every house was a mirror of the next. Meticulously manicured lawns, identical facades, and uniform decorative elements were the norm, enforced rigorously by the local homeowners association, HOA. The rules were strict, down to the exact height of the hedges and the color of the holiday lights, and residents were expected to toe the line without question. At the helm of this tight ship was Karen Miller, known to everyone as HOA Karen. In her early 50s, with a perpetually severe expression and always armed with a clipboard and smartphone, she had become the unofficial enforcer of Crescent Ridge's aesthetic purity. Karen was known to patrol the neighborhood with an almost militaristic precision, issuing fines and reprimands at the slightest deviation from the rules. To her, any display of individual creativity was a threat to the pristine image of the community. It wasn't uncommon for her to file complaints over things as trivial as a mismatched garden gnome or a stray piece of modern art that didn't conform to the established norm. I, however, was not one to be constrained by rigid standards. Having inherited a sprawling piece of land on the outskirts of Crescent Ridge, I had built my home and cultivated my farm with a blend of practicality and unbridled creativity. Every winter, as the temperature dropped and snow blanketed the land, I found solace and inspiration in carving sculptures out of ice and snow, a way to celebrate the season's beauty in my own unique style. To me, these sculptures were more than just temporary art. They were expressions of my soul, a way to turn the harsh winter into a playground for imagination. My property was a sanctuary of rustic charm, where wide open fields met innovative touches like a modern barn outfitted with solar panels and a landscape that blended wild beauty with carefully tended gardens. I believe that the freedom to express oneself, even in something as ephemeral as snow art, was a fundamental right. So when the HOA began fining me for my snow sculptures, labeling them unauthorized modifications to the community's uniform look, I saw it as the final straw. They couldn't take away my right to create art, even if it was built on ice. Crescent Ridge was divided. Many of my neighbors, bound by the strict rules and fearful of incurring fines, kept their creative impulses in check. Yet, there was a growing undercurrent of dissent among those who secretly admired my audacity. Whispers in the community spoke of a man who dared to defy the HOA's draconian measures, and my snow sculptures became a symbol of that rebellious spirit. Little did they know that I was preparing something monumental, a 20-foot snow statue that would capture the very essence of HOA, Karen herself. As winter deepened, my resolve only grew stronger. I meticulously planned each sculpture, drawing inspiration from both classic artistry and the raw, unyielding spirit of nature. And with every chisel of ice, I was not only carving art, I was carving out my freedom. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation between individual creativity and the oppressive conformity enforced by the HOA, with Karen Miller at the center of it all. The conflict had been simmering for months. Each time I unveiled a new snow sculpture in my front yard, Karen would appear, clipboard in hand, issuing fines and lecturing me on the supposed disturbance to the community's aesthetic harmony. At first, I tried to reason with her, explaining that art was a form of expression and that my sculptures were ephemeral. But Karen was unyielding. Her mission was to preserve the uniform beauty of Crescent Ridge, and no form of creativity was exempt from her scrutiny. The situation reached a breaking point one bitterly cold evening when I unveiled my latest masterpiece, a massive, intricately detailed snow sculpture that I'd labored over for days. The sculpture, a towering 20-foot statue of Karen Miller herself, was a breathtaking blend of irony and artistry. Every detail was painstakingly carved into the ice. The stern set of her jaw, the piercing glare in her eyes, and even the meticulous lines of her signature hairstyle. It was a powerful, silent rebuke to the very person who had fined me for my snow art. I had set up cameras to capture every moment of the unveiling. That night, as the final touches glistened under the pale moonlight, I activated my security system and watched the live feed with bated breath. I knew that Karen would eventually come looking for me. She had a reputation for confronting those who defied her orders. And sure enough, shortly after midnight, I saw her figure emerge from the shadows. Clad in her customary conservative attire, she marched determinedly toward my property, her eyes burning with indignation. Karen's arrival was inevitable. I recorded every second as she approached the sculpture, her face contorted in disbelief as she took in the towering, frosty visage of herself. The sight was both comical and tragic. Here was a woman so obsessed with enforcing perfection that she couldn't even fathom the irony of being immortalized in ice. She fumbled for her phone, presumably to call the HOA board again, while muttering under her breath about vandalism and outrage. The security footage captured it all, the shock, the anger, and the beginning of what would soon become a full-blown public spectacle. I sent out snippets of the footage on the community forum, and within minutes, my digital dossier of rebellious art was gathering momentum. Neighbors began to comment. That's what happens when you try to stifle creativity. And finally, someone put her in her place. The online reaction was electric. My 20-foot Karen statue had become a symbol of resistance against the oppressive forces of conformity. As the night wore on, I took a quiet moment to reflect on everything that had led to this confrontation. Every fine, every lecture, and every petty complaint from Karen had been a brushstroke in the larger picture of our community's struggle for individuality. I realized that my art wasn't just a defiant act. It was a statement that in Crescent Ridge, personal expression was sacred, and that no one, not even HOA Karen, had the right to dictate how we celebrated our lives. But the battle was far from over. Karen's reaction to the statue would set the stage for what was to come. Her next move was critical. Would she escalate her crusade, or would she be forced to confront the absurdity of her own rigid standards? I knew that once the public saw the statue in all its frozen glory, the tide would begin to turn in favor of those who believed in creative freedom. I prepared my next steps carefully. I updated my online community, urging them to support a petition demanding that the HOA board revisit their policies on art and property modifications. The petition quickly gathered thousands of signatures. The digital momentum was undeniable. Our community was ready for change, and my art had become the rallying cry for that revolution. In the meantime, I fortified my defenses. I checked and rechecked my security system, ensuring that every angle of my property was covered, so that if Karen attempted any further intrusion, I would have the evidence at hand. I even planned a small follow-up installation, a series of smaller sculptures that would chronicle the evolution of our resistance. Each piece was a testament to our fight, a symbol of how art and creativity could triumph over oppressive conformity. The conflict was now a full-blown movement, a battle for the right to live freely and creatively in a community that had long prized uniformity above all else. And as the icy winds of winter blew through Crescent Ridge, I knew that my 20-foot Karen statue would stand as a monument to that struggle, an enduring reminder that true beauty is found in the bold embrace of individuality. In the days following the unveiling of the Karen statue, the digital world erupted with reaction. Social media posts, videos, and comments poured in from every corner of Cedar Ridge. Hashtags such as hashtag Karen statue, hashtag Ice Justice, and hashtag Art for Freedom trended locally as residents, long silenced by fear of fines and arbitrary rules, finally found their voices. The image of a towering, frosty rendition of HOA Karen, complete with her signature frown frozen in time, became a symbol of defiance that resonated deeply with the community. Local news stations were quick to pick up the story. Reporters drove by my property, capturing shots of the massive snow sculpture illuminated by the soft glow of streetlights. Interviews with shocked residents revealed a mix of outrage and amusement. "I've never seen anything like it," one neighbor exclaimed on live television. "It's like art fighting back against tyranny." The narrative shifted from a simple act of vandalism to a broader discussion on artistic freedom and the right of property owners to express themselves without fear of retribution. Within the HOA board, tensions began to rise. Emergency meetings were convened, and behind closed doors, board members clashed over how to handle the fallout. Some defended Karen's strict policies, insisting that fines and complaints were necessary to maintain order. Others, however, began to acknowledge that Karen's actions and the resulting public outcry were undermining the very foundation of community trust. Leaked minutes from these meetings revealed deep divisions. One board member was quoted as saying, "We must respect individual expression, even if it challenges our traditions." The internal strife was palpable, and as the digital evidence of the statue spread, it became clear that the board's authority was slipping. I continued to bolster my digital dossier, posting additional footage of the statue from different angles, along with detailed commentary about the historical context of art in public spaces and the fundamental rights of property owners. My online updates became a rallying point for residents who felt oppressed by the HOA's stringent regulations. Comments like "This is a victory for every creative soul in Cedar Ridge," and "Karen can't police art," flooded in, reinforcing the growing movement against arbitrary enforcement. Karen, meanwhile, was caught in a downward spiral. Initially, she tried to dismiss the statue as a prank, merely an overreaction to a misunderstood situation. But as more residents shared their support for my stand, her tone shifted to one of desperation. In a series of hastily recorded videos, she apologized profusely to the HOA board, claiming she'd misinterpreted the purpose of the sculptures. But the damage was done. Every time she tried to justify her actions, the digital evidence of the towering statue and the overwhelming public support contradicted her narrative. The pressure on the HOA board mounted rapidly. Neighbors organized impromptu meetings in local community centers and even on the lawns of their own homes, demanding that the board take action against what many saw as an abuse of power. Online petitions against Karen's overreach gathered thousands of signatures, and influential local bloggers penned editorials championing the right to artistic freedom. "When art speaks, it demands to be heard," one blog post read, "and no one should silence the creative expression of a community out of fear of change." In an effort to restore order and address the controversy, the HOA board announced a final public hearing to review all complaints related to the snow sculptures and the subsequent actions. The news sent shockwaves through Cedar Ridge. The final hearing was set for a crisp, clear morning, and anticipation built to a fever pitch. Neighbors from every corner of the community planned to attend, armed with signs, digital evidence, and a united demand for accountability. As the day of the hearing approached, the digital dossier I had assembled became the cornerstone of the movement. Every shared image and video clip not only showcased the beauty of the 20-foot Karen statue, but also symbolized the community's rebellion against an overbearing system. The message was clear. If the HOA board failed to recognize our right to live freely and express ourselves through art, then the cost of such tyranny would continue to rise. The tension reached its apex as the final hours before the hearing ticked by. The community buzzed with a mixture of excitement and resolve. I could sense that this moment would be a turning point, not just for me, but for every resident who had ever felt stifled by the HOA's arbitrary rules. The stage was set for a showdown that would force the board to either reaffirm the oppressive status quo or embrace a future where individual rights and artistic expression were celebrated. The decisive moment came on a chilly morning in a packed boardroom at the Cedar Ridge Community Center. The room was filled with a diverse array of HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and hundreds of determined residents, all gathered to witness the final public vote that would determine the future of artistic and property rights in our community. With a calm, yet unwavering presence, Councilwoman Linda Harper stepped up to the podium, her eyes shining with the collective resolve of Cedar Ridge. After an exhaustive review of all digital evidence, including time-stamped security footage, detailed logs of complaints, and the impassioned testimonies of our residents, we have reached an inescapable conclusion. Councilwoman Harper began, her voice resonating with authority. It is abundantly clear that the actions taken by Mrs. Karen Miller, who repeatedly fined me for displaying my snow sculptures, were not based on any legitimate concern for community aesthetics, but were driven by personal bias and an abuse of power. Our community's values, freedom of expression, and the sanctity of private property demand that we stand up against such arbitrary enforcement. A heavy silence settled over the room as Harper continued. Effective immediately, the HOA board will rescind all fines and sanctions imposed in relation to these snow sculptures. Furthermore, we will initiate a full disciplinary review of the practices that allowed such a breach of property rights to occur. We will also implement new guidelines that protect the rights of every resident to display creative art without fear of retribution. Today's decision is not merely about reversing an unjust fine. It is a resounding declaration that Cedar Ridge will no longer tolerate personal vendettas masquerading as community standards. Her words struck a chord, and murmurs of approval spread throughout the assembly. At that moment, a well-respected community advocate, known for his steadfast commitment to individual freedoms, rose to speak. "Today we stand united," he declared, his voice strong and impassioned. "No one in our community should have their right to express themselves through art infringed upon by an overzealous enforcer. Let this vote mark the turning point, a clear signal that we will defend our property rights and creative freedom at all costs. We demand accountability, and we will not rest until every violation of our rights is rectified." His declaration was met with thunderous applause, echoing the shared sentiment of every resident present. Following his address, a senior officer from the local fire department presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of digital evidence, expert testimonies, and official reports that confirmed the routine nature of the snow sculptures and debunked every claim made by Karen Miller. The evidence was irrefutable. My artistic expressions were entirely legal, and every fine imposed by the HOA was nothing more than an abuse of power. The Internal Affairs panel unanimously endorsed strict disciplinary measures against those responsible, and the full report was scheduled for immediate public release. Councilwoman Harper concluded, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Cedar Ridge, a community where individual rights and creative expression are honored, and where public authority is exercised with integrity." Our vote today is a resounding declaration that we will protect our freedoms and that no one can impose their personal biases on our community without accountability. Together, we stand for justice, transparency, and the inalienable right to live creatively and freely. Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our struggle for property rights and artistic freedom. In that defining moment, as every face in the boardroom shone with determination and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and the unified voice of the community forced the HOA board to take decisive action, a turning point that would forever reshape the governance of Cedar Ridge. The days of arbitrary fines and personal vendettas were over, and a future built on respect for individual expression was finally within our grasp. In the weeks that followed the historic vote, Cedar Ridge underwent a profound transformation. News of the rescinded fines and sweeping reforms implemented by the HOA board spread like wildfire throughout local media and on social networks, sparking fervent debates about property rights, creative freedom, and community governance. Editorials in the local newspaper, bearing headlines such as "A New Dawn for Cedar Ridge" and "Community United for Creative Freedom," celebrated the decisive actions taken to protect every resident's right to express themselves without fear. Hashtags like #PropertyRights, #NoMoreHOA, and #ArtIsFreedom trended widely, reinforcing our collective determination to stand up against arbitrary rule enforcement. Town hall meetings and community forums saw record attendance as residents gathered to share their experiences and to envision a future where artistic expression was not only tolerated but celebrated. Neighbors who had long lived in fear of punitive fines and invasive inspections now spoke proudly about their right to live on their own terms, unbound by outdated regulations. Our homes and our art are expressions of who we are, one impassioned resident declared at a bustling meeting, his voice ringing clear across the crowded room. The atmosphere was charged with hope, a promise that Cedar Ridge would always honor the creative spirit of its residents. Within the reformed HOA board and local public safety departments, swift changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, launched comprehensive training programs focused on ethical conduct, cultural sensitivity, and the responsible management of community resources. Regular internal audits and transparent disciplinary procedures were established to ensure that every complaint was scrutinized fairly and that no resident would ever again be subjected to arbitrary fines or punitive measures. Our duty is to protect the rights and freedoms of every member of our community, Lieutenant Reed affirmed during a follow-up press conference, reinforcing our renewed commitment to justice and integrity. Community leaders and local civil rights organizations also mobilized to further empower residents. Workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns were organized to raise awareness about the importance of artistic expression and individual property rights. When we stand together, our voices have the power to reshape our community, a local activist proclaimed at a town hall meeting, inspiring neighbors to unite in the fight for a more inclusive and fair governance model. For me, the journey from confrontation to resolution was both deeply personal and profoundly transformative. My decision to retaliate against HOA Karen for her petty fines by building a 20-foot snow statue of her and reclaiming my right to express myself through art had not only restored my creative freedom, but had also ignited a movement that resonated throughout Cedar Ridge. Neighbors, once intimidated by the strict imposition of conformity, found their voices and shared their own stories of resistance. The digital evidence that exposed the absurdity of the fines became a rallying cry for every resident who believed that property rights and artistic freedom were inalienable. Karen Miller, once the formidable enforcer of the HOA's draconian rules, was now reduced to a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that no one is above accountability when the community unites for justice. Her influence dwindled as digital records of her past transgressions circulated widely, underscoring the need for reform and the dangers of unchecked power. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Cedar Ridge, residents, local officials, and community advocates gathered beneath the warm glow of the setting sun. A large banner reading "Unity, Freedom, and creative expression was unfurled between towering oaks, and heartfelt speeches echoed with promises of a brighter, more inclusive future. Today, we celebrate the victory of our rights over arbitrary interference, a victory for every homeowner and every creative soul in our community, Councilwoman Harper proclaimed, her voice resolute and inspiring. The standing ovation that followed was a powerful affirmation of our collective commitment to protect our freedoms and ensure that creativity remains a cherished value in Cedar Ridge. As each new day dawned over our transformed neighborhood, the legacy of that fateful confrontation endured as a beacon of progress. The story of how HOA Karen's baseless fines for my snow sculptures were met with a bold act of creative rebellion, manifested in a towering 20-foot statue of herself, became a rallying cry for every resident who believed in the sanctity of private property and the right to express oneself freely. Every sunrise now carried with it the promise that in Cedar Ridge, truth, justice, and artistic freedom would forever prevail. In the end, what began as a personal battle evolved into a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined to safeguard our rights against any form of bureaucratic overreach. And as the sun rose each morning over our reclaimed neighborhood, it carried with it the promise that Cedar Ridge would forever be a place where creativity, integrity, and respect for individual expression shone as bright as the winter sun on fresh snow.